Hey there, everybody. We are live again for another short period of time where Terry Francis and I will be discussing some of the aspects connected to the work of an evangelist. Terry will be joining us shortly. Hopefully, those who have been watching these broadcasts on each of our personal pages will have a chance to catch these now, as we tend to try to do them directly through the Do the Work Facebook page. We thought we'd give that a try for a little bit and see how that plays out. Terry is joining us now, so we're going to add him into the broadcast.
Really simple. How can I, as an evangelist, as a preacher, as a gospel teacher, have genuine, real friendships and be the evangelist and be the preacher? Hey, Terry.
Hey.
I see you've dropped in from above and you've made your safe landing. You stuck it this time. That's good.
I'm much quicker this time. How about that?
There you go. There you go. So I've already kind of dropped our big topic. Haven't really gotten into the detail just yet. Just letting folks know a couple of things. One, that, as I mentioned already, we're going to try to do these directly from the Do the Work page for the time being, and kind of see how that impacts the effectiveness of this medium. But the conversation is going to be the same. You have us two knuckleheads, but you have to look at our bobbleheads during the conversation. And so that didn't really change. And so that's kind of the same.
Right.
Beyond that, Terry, let's get right down to it. We've got three categories, if you will, that we're going to try to break this idea down to. But it's really about how, as an evangelist, a gospel teacher, a preacher, we can have a real relationship, a real friendship with people, and still be, and we didn't put it in the title, but still be effective as a preacher.
Yeah, it's an ultimate fear, I think, for most preachers. And I think, let me say it this way too, you get more disenfranchised in this relationship the longer you preach. And one of the things for my young preacher friends, or any preacher friend, is that one of the dangers in this area of relationships and friendships is not to become too cynical. And that's a tough challenge. We'll talk about that as we go through today.
Yeah, cynicism is a plague in most core service type relationships where you're trying to help someone in that way. Yeah. So in our first kind of area, one of the struggles that comes up sometimes is building a genuine relationship with the various tiers of leadership that exist in congregations. And specifically, I'm talking primarily about those who might also be preachers or teachers, those who may also be elders, those who may also be deacons, because they're already your brethren. They're already part of the broad scope of humanity, but the nature of their service roles changes their interaction with you. And so there's some difficulties there. There's certainly some barriers to genuineness that exist on the friction edges of those corners of our lives.
Yeah, so let me say, get in a little bit. I feel, there we go. Let me say that I think I always struggle more to have good relationships with probably leaders at the same congregation I am at than I do with those who are at different congregations. And it's for a couple of reasons. The first and foremost is sometimes it's difficult for your relationship not to just be about work. It's very hard sometimes. One of the things we try to do here is get together with the elders a couple times, or whether that's just a couple of them or all of them, and not just talk about church stuff. Talk about our families, get to know each other, get to be friends, have a relationship. That makes doing the work easier if you can do that. But it is a little difficult sometimes to do that.
We approach it like it's some sort of cross between a ballet and a fire walk. Which both of those are a little bit of the artistry of the event. Ballet is actually really physical, and the fire walk is really just a little bit of deception. But we treat them that way. And here's some illustrations of that from a very practical way. Preachers need to have the connectedness with their family in Christ that gives them stability and confidence, much in the same way as, say, Moses needed someone to help raise his arms.
Right.
In the illustrative sense, preachers get tired, just like everybody else gets tired. And we get overly excited. We get overly zealous sometimes. And we need some balancing because our personalities are very and sometimes drastically different from everybody else around us. There are preachers who are classic introverts. There are preachers who maybe like Terry and I are more on the extroverted side of the scale. If there is any room left after us, I don't know. There probably is.
Just a little bit, though.
Yeah, well, to be fair, if it's a seesaw, there's going to be a lot of people on the other end of the table. Terry and I certainly take up our own space on one end. But there's a lot of value to that only takes place with real integration of those personalities. But there's a struggle because to become close to someone means that you have to be more honest in the things that you openly share. And honesty and transparency and sharing are struggles when leadership gets in the connection too, because there are certain things that you don't necessarily share with everybody because God tells us not to. And so we struggle with, no, I can't tell you that. You know, and the dishonesty comes not towards someone lying to somebody else. We deceive ourselves. We tell ourselves lies like, well, if I tell them this, they won't listen to me anymore as a preacher. And sometimes that might be true, but it's not always true. But we act as if it is, and so that's that. There's a really sticky balance in those two places that is hard to step around.
And we tell ourselves too, specifically in regards to leadership within the churches we are at, if I tell them this about me, how I think or how I feel or what I'm struggling with, we view them as an employer and I could lose my job. That's the other side of that. There's a question I once wondered about and put it this way in regards to the elders: who shepherds shepherds? Shepherds go out and they shepherd the congregation and they try to meet their needs spiritually, but often emotionally comes into that play because that is such a fine line between those two. Well, who does that for elders? And who does that for preachers? And the problem is sometimes we have a real hard time as leaders sharing of ourselves. I once had somebody tell me who I was really, really close friends with, and I had developed the ability to confide in them. And then they were later appointed as an elder. And they admitted to me later on that we were no longer friends after they became an elder because he couldn't be my friend because I was the preacher and he was an elder. And I'm not the only person that's been told that to, by the way. And the problem that comes from that is there is this underlying thought sometimes, we can't have relationships. You work for me. Yeah. Or how can I come in and tell you that you've got to change the way you preach if we're friends? And I got to tell you, I think that's because that's happened to me and it's happened to other people, that leads us to a general distrust in that relationship. And a lot of that is tied to the fact that we view that solely as us being employees a lot of times from both sides of the equation. And that challenges us on this relationship side.
Yeah, and Terry may have some of these same connections too. I've got a lot of brethren who are friends of mine who have served in various military capacities, either with the various primary branches of the military government service, and those jobs tend to move you a lot. Their families, because of that unique culture and that transitory nature, build some of these same connection barriers the preachers' families have. And while we're talking about preachers, we're also kind of including our families too, because they definitely share in all of these struggles. In a very simple sense, I know this happens because it's happened to me and my family, that my kids have been shut out by kids their own age at times because their dad is a preacher. And if their dad is a preacher, that means if the kid told another kid about something that happened in their home, they legitimately fear that's going to then become the subject of the sermon next week. I want to tell somebody, tell everyone kind of, at least in my preacher process, that's not even possible because I plan my preaching out way in advance. And it has nothing to do with what's going on in the struggles of someone's home at all. I hope it reaches somebody's home, but it's not because I'm directing it to go to a particular address in the neighborhood. But I know people feel that way, and I remember what it was like before I was preaching, that sometimes it really did felt like the preacher had just gotten into my hip pocket. And
who told him that?
Who told him how dumb I was? It's how foolish I was and how hurtful my behavior was. I know, and I listen to sermons all the time. I get stung just as much as anybody else does. Which is separate issues. We can talk about that sometimes too, is what happens when the preacher needs to correct his course.
The other thing is I feel bad, really and truthfully, for our wives. There's a tremendous amount of pressure. I think both of our wives did not want to marry a preacher, and they ended up doing that. And part of that was because, like the military, we seem to be somewhat transient, although we've not moved around probably as much as we thought we would.
Yeah.
But the second part is they feel like they cannot have friends at church. A typical wife has a friend, and this is common, that she can talk to about her struggles, and included in that is her struggles at home with her husband. What if my wife goes and talks to another wife at church about how I was a jerk last week? And I get up the next week and I preach about how husbands are supposed to love their wives. Yeah. Well, now, all of a sudden, my wife knows, well, I've just ruined his sermon. So I can't have friends. And my wife has said to me before on several occasions, I just can't have friends at church. I'm not allowed to have friends. Yeah. And I'll say that the same side, husbands are the same way. Husbands normally have friends that they talk to. And as a general rule, I think, Phil, you're a lot like me. Sometimes I feel like I can't have any friends at church because I can't talk to about what my real struggles are. Because then you know that I'm human. I'm real. And I'm not this super spiritual guy that gets up and has no problems. And so we kind of shut everybody out. The ones we should be able to talk to about that probably more so than others are the leaders because they're in the same position. But if in the same place, we have to shut them out of protection, which then leads us to, if you're like me, and we have this kind of, we find friendship a lot of times in other preachers in other places.
Yeah.
Because we share the same problems and it's safe. And I can call you and I can talk to you about the problems that I'm having, and you can tell me about the problems you're having. And we may form opinions about each other, but at the end of the day, we don't make the harsh judgments we feel that everybody else is going to make.
Right. And let me tell you two things about this. Those who are preachers who are listening to this, you need that. You need to have a friend. You may not agree with them about everything. You may have different lifestyles, all of that, but they also preach. You need people like that in your life. We talked about that before. But our goal here with this is to encourage that next little bit more. You need a friend that may be at a distance, but you need a friend that's closer than a brother too, locally, hopefully in the congregation there, who is not going to respond with negative judgment, you're about to get fired, emotive behavior. Whether that's actually going place or not, that's how we feel it sometimes on the preacher's edge. And even being discouraged. Hal mentioned this right now about how being discouraged is a perspective of weakness. The majority of preachers work with congregations less than 80 members. The majority of those congregations do not have elders. This is not anecdotal, this is reality. So that means that the evangelist is carrying 1, 2, 3 times the load that probably is appropriate for him, especially when he's in his 20s and 30s. So you give a man too much to carry, he's going to sweat and then break. I mean, it's just, he'll get a little stronger first, but eventually he'll break under the pressure. And friendships fix that.
And those churches don't grow probably as quickly as other places, largely because you have one man doing the job of probably 8. And that just makes him more discouraged. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And he questions. One of the things you got to understand is because of our job, and this is where the discouragement comes in, we take everything personally about the church. Mm-hmm. So if Wednesday night, the return percentage is like 50% of who was there on Sunday morning, we feel like that's our fault, and we get discouraged by it. if there's problems at church, even if we're not directly involved, we feel like we could have done something better, and we're discouraged by that. Who do we express that to in a way that doesn't make it look like we're weak? That becomes the issue. The answer most often is other preachers. Look, Phil and I are friends, and we've been friends since college. But we've not always been in contact with each other, but some things in life caused us to come back together, and we have this relationship. We don't always agree, but we have a good enough relationship where we can say and disagree and say, well, you could have done this better, or I think this would help. And that's important to have. And I have that with some other guys too. You need some of those people, but it's good to have it locally, and it's important.
Yeah, and there's a couple of questions we're going to try to tag into those two in a second. With catching all of this, and let me say it from my side. The circumstances that brought Terry and I to rekindle, if you will, our friendship were stressful. And that stress became able to be managed better by having someone who could just be a friend, and wasn't looking at it as sometimes these relationships go where, and I'll be straight. I'm going to talk a little frankly. Sometimes preachers look at preacher-preacher relationship and they think in terms of ego and gospel meetings. You're only a friend with me because you want to hold a meeting here, so you're talking me up. Or you're only a friend with me because you held a meeting here, and you want to hold another one here, and you don't want to keep that reputation relationship. I intentionally don't do a lot of meetings, and I'm a weirdo that way. I think I've told people for years that I don't want to do a lot of meeting work because my kids are at home, and they're a priority to me. And also, the local work is a heavy priority to me. But I love meeting work, and I love the men who do meeting work, and we have meetings, and we do all that stuff. But my focus is kind of put into a particular box. And connected to all of this is that preachers, the generations before us, and I'll talk openly about a thing real quickly. It was a normal thing, particularly in the Southeast, for preachers to move every 2 to 3 years. My grandfather-in-law, if you will, Clint Springer, he preached 1 to 2 years in a lot of little churches in East Texas behind the Pine Curtain, and that was just his experience. And so that formed an attitude about preaching, that preachers move. And so you think about what happens when that good friend you had, and this connects to Josh's question, when your best friend is at a congregation where you no longer preach. The daggers that go into that emotional, heart-rending moment are never ending in some ways. Sometimes that good friend becomes the catalyst for your departure, and you weren't seeing it coming. Sometimes that good friend is hurt as much or more by your departure because maybe you were their only friend. Maybe you were their first real, genuine friendship, and the preacher chose to move. And now you've lost your best friend, who is also a mentor spiritually. You're going to be hurt. These are real relationships. Congregations are not a Chick-fil-A or an REI or a Home Depot. They're families. And when one hurts, they all hurt, even though the hurt may not be seen right away. And so Josh's question, is it more or less healthy to have a friend in a congregation which you no longer serve? The answer is it depends on the friendship. In a positive sense, I would wish that they're always positive. But on a practical level, it just depends. But you need that friendship. If it's a good friendship and you guys are spiritually minded and you're trying to do your best to handle a rough situation, it's going to be better for you to have that friendship, even if you're no longer preaching there. There's some wonderful brethren up in Indiana that I've done some meeting work up there that I'm really close to spiritually. We don't live near each other. I want to maintain those friendships, even though I don't work with them in a regular capacity as an evangelist. I need them, and maybe they need me. I'm better off because of it. And let me add one more thing. Terry, I know you got some stuff, and I tend to talk a lot, and I apologize. Terry's giving me the look. I can see it.
No, I'm not.
But here's the thing, especially when you're a young preacher, do not burn the bridges of your relationship with gospel preachers of any age, because you'll need that bridge 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road.
Yeah, it's to Josh's question about more or less healthy to have a friend at a congregation which you no longer serve. That really depends. I will tell you that one of the struggles that I have with friendships of places where I have been is maintaining that fine line of making sure that I am a friend that builds them up and doesn't allow my personal past to cause a problem for them or the congregation that they're in. And so if someone, for instance, calls me from a place that I preached at to complain, it is my job to be overtly positive and to try to build them up and to try to say to them, it's not that bad. And try to help, because that's really our role, is to build one another up. I prefer my friendship not to be based on those kind of things. I prefer my friendship to be based on, and sometimes I can be a better friend after I'm gone because we don't talk about that stuff. So it just depends on the relationship.
Yeah.
Um,
Most definitely. So when we kind of move out of that leadership spectrum, we're talking about our brethren at large. Here's something to think about. There's a certain sense of gravitas or strength to the role of a preacher. And this is kind of a hint at a future topic, but preachers kind of always feel like they're Prince Charming, and churches always kind of feel like they're Cinderella, and that we can just, if we got together, it would be a Disney ending. The reality is that preachers are people. Raymond Castillo told me long ago, we were having lunch together, and he was saying, oh, you really are comfortable with who you are. I'm an outgoing person. I'm big. I'm a giant, all that stuff. And there's nothing I can do about it. So I have to be comfortable with who I am. But I think there's a sense of understanding that then if we can connect with our brethren in the right, healthy ways and build real friendships with them, how much better does the church get when we're actually knit together well? It's hard for all the reasons we've talked about, but we need to be able to just hang out and, guess I'll tell you something that's true. The local preacher, me, complains at times about the local preacher who is also me.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I think one of the things about friendships with brethren is it's I'm going to say this to members. It may seem at times that we're distant, that we're hard to connect to. And that is because we do build up walls as preachers. Let's just be for real and honest for a moment. We build up walls because we find it hard to trust anybody.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you from personal experience why that is. I have people who, in my past, who I thought were friends, who then, in the terms of our friendship, took some of those things, and whether consciously or unconsciously they were aware of this, used those things against me in my work by discussing some of those things with leadership and not discussing them with me. And that was harmful to me, not just professionally, if you will, but it injured me personally, and it wounded me. I think scripturally, one of the things you learn from Matthew 18 and Matthew 5 and those passages of that there's problems between brethren is to take care of it privately. That's the goal. The problem is a lot of times in regards to the preacher or leadership, we don't take care of those things privately. And when that's done, especially from a friend who you may go out and you may hang out with, but then they go and they privately behind your back say things about you, whether it's some of the confidential things you shared or just anything without coming to you, that is very damaging to preachers. And so we build walls up to protect ourselves from that because we are afraid, just to be clear, that the day's going to come that we upset you and we're going to be betrayed by that friendship.
Yeah.
And so we choose, and our wives are too. My wife is worse at that than I am, by the way, because of some past things. And so as a result of that, we often choose not to have deep-rooted friendships in the congregations we're at out of that fear to protect ourselves from that being injured again. And that's just about as open and honest as I can be. And you may think that that's silly, but I'm sure if I asked any preachers to answer on here, they would, if they're willing publicly, would agree with that position.
Right. We've got a lot of guys that are popping up on the feed. Many of you are preachers. I want to say a couple of things. If you feel like there's something we need to talk about or readdress or cover in a different way, message us privately is perfectly cool. you know, um, and we can talk about it in a different context. If you want to talk about it here and you feel comfortable sharing stuff, share away. Just know that it's 100% public.
Yeah.
We made that decision. That's just how it is. It's easiest for us in some ways to know that that's the case. So
Yeah.
to know that too, if you're going to share something, it's 100% public and it will stay that way.
Two things comments, by the way, I wanted to get to real quick. One was replied to Keith about it's a lonely job. Plenty of things, and I think this is interesting, plenty of things that me and my family have been excluded from because I'm a preacher. The flip side of that is we can't exclude anyone without ever being viewed negatively. There are gatherings that happen that we don't get to go to because we're the preacher. But if I ever have anything at my house, I have to be very careful. I make sure I invite everybody because you don't want anybody to get upset. And there is a double standard there that comes into play. The second thing I wanted to mention was Hal said, is that a needful thing or regretful thing? I guess he's referring to our barriers and our walls to protect us and not have friendships. I think that's regretful. I think it's regretful for this reason, Hal, because what that's done, what my own insecurities and fears and anxieties in this area have done is they have prevented me from having good relationships with my spiritual family that I should be able to have.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part.
And I know the pain of hearing my family say, why weren't we invited? And then realizing before I opened my mouth, oh, we weren't invited because you're the preacher.
Yeah.
To events, to circumstances, to settings. And understand that's real family hurt. It's it's a kind of bullying that takes place, if you want to use popular terminologies, but it's painful. It just hurts.
Yeah.
In the biggest sense of things, being a preacher also means you're going to be treated differently and have struggled to have friendships, even with those who are not part of the local congregation you're at, not in a leadership role, maybe not even Christians altogether. I remember years ago being on a Cub Scout adventure, and one of the dads started telling jokes, and then he stopped himself and he says, no, I can't tell this joke because the preacher's here. And I'm thinking, you shouldn't tell it at all.
Yeah.
But then it reminded me that even outside in the world, there are folks who won't connect with me, my family, because we're viewed as a weirdo because dad preaches. Dad does this. And by the way, I know that happens with all career choices. Doctors, if your dad's a doctor, if your dad's a lawyer, if your dad's a that, it's 100% true. Kids are lawyers. Everybody thinks lawyers are awful. I don't think that. Lawyers are people too. There are some bad lawyers. There's some really amazing ones, just like there are in every other realm of service in the world. But we need those friendships. And that's one of the things that I think I wanted to emphasize in this conversation is that you look at Genesis 18, and I brought that text in intentionally, where the Lord is letting Abraham see a big picture of everything the Lord is doing, so that he can make the whole thing better. I want to tell everybody what you really want to make as an aspirational goal is that you learn to know the Christians you worship with a level of comfort that when you reach a moment where something painful is shared, their response is not to judge, but to embrace. Just like I am guaranteeing you every mama would do when their kids get hurt. Their mother chicken is going to come and care for the chicks. That's what we kind of need to get to. That's the aspirational goal. The reality is there are pitched lines of defense in everybody's hearts that make it difficult to surmount each of those barriers to get a little bit closer and a little bit closer. And being a preacher, you're going to have a bunch more added. You'll have more challenge than average.
I have found in my community involvement work, and this has been positive for me, that the community at large has been more accepting of me as a friend than even members at times. And for me, that's because I don't go around bragging I'm a preacher. I don't bring it up. It gets asked. I just say, In the area of sports, our kids don't play during church times, and they know that. They don't practice, and we'll have those conversations, and they always go well. When we travel, if we go out as a team, they know I'm not going to drink. They know that and we may go someplace and they may drink. And I've been in situations where I sit there in the hotel lobby with them talking and they are drinking. And not heavily, by the way. We're not talking about some frat party or anything, but it's just their nature, for instance. But they'll joke around about that. They know I'm not going to do that. They know I'm not going to, and we have good relationships. And I've had people come to hear me preach just because they want to hear me preach, that they've met me through sports or through some school or through something else. I tell you, and I have just this past Saturday night, we came back from soccer. We went, after driving a long way home, returning out of town, and met some people from the community back in Memphis that were in town for their own tournament and wanted to see us. We have strong ties to some of those non-Christian friends, and in some ways have been more accepted and felt more at home with them and less judged. And I think that's sad. It also has led us to do some really good evangelistic work at times. Some of those same people are people we met outside of the church building that we've converted them to Christ because of that. Not every case, by the way. And let me say why that is because the people I met in the community who weren't Christians were able to view me as a normal person and not just a preacher. And I think that's the challenge I would leave for members, because I know we're close to time, is stop looking at us as the preacher all the time. Let me illustrate this way. We are sheep too. We struggle with all the same things you struggle. We just get up. We just happen to get up publicly and say that we shouldn't struggle with them. But truthfully, look at us and support us as members more than employees or preachers or the preacher's family or the preacher's kids. Try to look at us as just an equal rather than something different. And along those lines, don't view us as transient. Phil mentioned earlier, there was a time where preachers, and there's some preachers who still like this, would move every 3 to 5 years, and some still prefer to do that. I am not that guy. We intended to be at our last location for as long as we could, and just happened that happened to be 11 years. We moved here to Chelsea, Alabama. We intend to be here for as long as they'll have us. And look, I would love nothing more than to retire here and not move again. It is not my intention to come in and be here for 5 years and then desert you and leave, because we're a family. God hates divorce. He hates when families split up. And if I'm your family, I have no intentions of leaving. Doesn't mean I won't, because of other circumstances, but I don't have intentions of leaving. And a little secret I know from Phil and myself we've talked about, and I hope you understand this, we've had a lot of opportunities where we've been at to leave and to go to what would be considered better works. And if we had valued climbing the corporate ladder like most of our brethren do, we would have moved a lot more. We didn't do that because you are our family, and we want to be a part of a family and not be separated from you.
Yeah.
So stop viewing us as transient. Stop viewing us as something different. Help us by building a trust. And when there is a problem, just come talk to us. We are not as scary as it appears. And I know Phil and I are a lot alike. We're extroverts. We have type A personalities. We are confident. When we get up and preach or teach a class, you need to understand we study for hours. We want to present that in the best way. It means confidence. But you come to us personally one-on-one. We're not going to attack you. We're not going to intimidate you. We're going to love you, and we're going to work to a resolution that we can build on. And in every case I've had that happen privately, my relationship has grown stronger because of that interaction. Yeah. So that would be my kind of takeaway personally.
Yeah, our shared experiences with like our intention to move and all of that's the same 100% for me. I'm not a person who likes picking up and moving. I love to go on adventures, but I love to go back home after the adventure.
I hate packing.
So here's the thing. genuinely speaking, the relationship of Christians is vital beyond just the thin veneer of I like you, you like me, we can have a meal together, have 2 laughs, and then go back home and never think about each other again. We need more than that as preachers. And so my first layer is to those who are preaching, again, build intentional relationships with people who are around you that go beyond the surface. That's going to be hard. Do it with those who also preach, and make sure your motives are in check. I'll just tell you straight also on the other end, you're not going to friendship your way into a bunch of meetings. Everybody knows that's not how it works.
Or into a new job.
Or into a new job.
Yeah, a new work. Or don't be selfish in your relationship. By the way, that's a principle that applies to everybody.
Right. And, preachers sometimes get afraid of another preacher being friends with members in the congregation when they preach. Are they going to want that guy to come here so that I have to stop?
Yeah.
Just stop. Your ego is already sensitive enough when you preach. Understand that for the most part, it doesn't really work that way. And if it does, it was wrong. And it was probably sinful. And repentance needs to happen. Beyond the leadership edges of those things with your brethren, get stronger together. Be knit together in a way that creates a level of strength that it is superior to what you could have done on your own. That's God's design. That's his intention. And then in the broadest sense, in your relationships with those who are in a community who may not have heard the gospel before, maybe they're like the disciples of John who believe in God but haven't fully committed themselves to the work of Christ. Be a good friend to them. Be open with them and share with them. In my community service, both as a coach at times, working with sports groups, serving as Cub Master, Scout Master, all that stuff. I loved it when I was stopped. I was no longer identified as the preacher, and they just called me Scoutmaster or Coach, because that's what I was trying to do at the time, and to be strong and encouraging in that relationship, and just be a friend, and laugh at things that are funny, and go enjoy God's creation, and then talk about God as a friend would talk to another friend about it. I think that's a powerful part of life that sometimes gets put on the back burner for preachers for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, as we close out today, like, comment, share this post because we want to reach the people who need it most. We want to be corrected when we're wrong. If we've missed something or our perspective is skewed by our limited experiences, we need to know the things we don't know. Look forward to this every Tuesday as much as we're physically able at the same bat time and the same bat channel. That's for Bobby Blackburn if he catches it. He's a Batman aficionado, and so maybe he'll see that and make a comment here or there. And if you've got something we want to talk about that needs to be talked about, let us know that too. We really appreciate that information coming our way.
Yeah, and as you hopefully noticed, we're trying to cover a variety of topics, and some of those may be more specific to preachers, but always kind of peel back the curtain of the work and not only help preachers, but also educate members maybe about what we go through. And part of that, by the way, is intended for you to feel more comfortable with us and be able to have better relationships with all preachers wherever you're at. And I hope one of the things that may happen from today in our honesty, and we could have been a lot more detailed, by the way, but I hope you understand some of the things we talked about, that if you're a normal member, not a preacher, after today's conversation, reach out and try to be a good friend and try to encourage the preacher, whether you like him or not, by the way, because I think that's what we all should be doing for each other. Yeah.
One closing comment. Terry and I pick on each other a lot. We're comfortable with that. Sometimes our friendship sometimes is not really, the humor is maybe not seen as we're directing it towards each other. Know this, I'm going to do it right now. Terry said normal members. Well, some preachers are abnormal, and that includes Terry and I. And so we're comfortable with that. If you see us joking around, 99% of the time it's because he's picking on me and I'm picking on him.
Not true.
Okay, it's 100% of the time.
Okay, yes. Yeah.
All right. Hey, everybody, have a great day. Hopefully you'll find some great opportunities to share the gospel with somebody, or you'll receive some great insight to spiritual things. Share that with someone else once you've been blessed by God. Take care.